in this lesson, and then we'll resume from where we left off in lesson 12 in the next lesson, inshallah. And so this particular paragraph appears right after Imam al-Khadimi's initial explanation regarding the words of the Fatiha. And so after explaining the words of the Fatiha, Imam al-Khadimi says, فَلَوْ لَمْ يَكُنْ لَكَ فِي صَلَاتِكَ حَظٌّ سِوَى ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى فِي جَلَالِهِ وَعَظَمَتِهِ فَنَاهِيكَ بِهَا غَنِيمَةً فَكَيْفَ بِمَا تَرْجُو مِنْ ثَوَابِهِ وَفَضْلِهِ. That if you had no share in your prayer except the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, recalling His majesty and His greatness, then this on its own suffices as a reward for you. The very act that you have been given this tawfiq to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your prayer is enough of a reward for you. And this is a very profound point that Ibn Ata'illah also mentions in his hikam when he says that it is enough of a reward for your worship that Allah has chosen you to engage in that act of worship. There's a great merit and honor in being given this position, that one is a believer in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and one performs acts of worship to express reverence and submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then Imam al-Khadimi, after this point, he mentions that just like I have taught you and I've instructed you that to attain khushu in your prayer, you need to be aware of the meaning of the Fatiha. You need to reflect on the wording of the Fatiha. Similarly, you also need to be reflective about the surahs that you're reciting within your prayer and not be heedless of what you are saying in terms of these surahs. And so he says, وَكَذَلِكَ لَا تَغْفُلْ إِنَّ قِرَاءَةِ سَائِرِ سُوَرِ أَنْ مُلَاحَظَةِ الْمَعْنَى في وعده ووعيده ومواعظه وأخبار أنبيائه وذكر نعمه وإحسانه. So when you are reciting these surahs, then be mindful and pay attention to the meanings of these surahs and the various themes that arise within these surahs in regard to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's promise of reward, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's threat of punishment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala giving warnings to people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioning the stories and the past events of the Anbiya and the Prophets, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioning His bounty and the blessings that He has given creation. وَلِكُلِّ حَقٍّ. And each one of these things has a particular right associated with it, a particular response that a believer should express and manifest when these themes arise in the Quran, in what he is reading. So he says, فَحَقُّ الْوَعْدِ الرَّجَاءُ. And so the right associated with the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the way you should react when you come across a verse in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is promising you reward and promising the believers X or Y, or promising those who do good a specific type of reward, is to have hope. وَحَقُّ الْوَعِيدِ الْخَوْفِ. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions a threat of punishment, then the proper response to this is a sense of fear. وَحَقُّ الْأَمْرِ وَالنَّهِي الْعَزْمِ. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions a command or a prohibition, then the proper response associated with this from the one who is reciting these verses is to have a sense of resolve that one will obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَحَقُّ الْمَوْعِظَةِ الْإِتِّعَاذِ. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions something to warn the believers, then we take these as warnings. وَحَقُّ ذِكْرِ الْمِنَّةِ الشُّكْرِ. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions His blessings and favors, then the response to this is a sense of thankfulness. وَحَقُّ الْقَصَصِ الْاعْتِبَارِ. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the various stories about the past nations, then the proper response to this is to be reflective and to consider what lessons can be drawn from these stories that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions. And this is what Imam al-Ghazali mentions in his Ihya al-Ulumuddin. Now, when we look at what Imam al-Khadimi is mentioning over here, there are three concepts within our tradition that are worth taking note of, which relate to this idea of a particular haqq or right being associated with these themes and these themes that are arising when we are reciting in our prayer. The first thing is this concept of adab. And adab, even though we often translate it as good manners, adab actually has a wider meaning of someone responding to a specific moment in a way that is most fitting for that moment. So every moment has a particular demand and has a particular adab associated with it. And so you are a person of adab when you are responding to the moment in the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects you to respond to that moment, in the way that He has prescribed. So sometimes mercy is called for in a specific moment, and anger in that moment would be khilaful adab. It will be contrary to what is dictated by adab. Other times, anger is more suited to the moment, and mercy would be khilaful adab, and so on and so forth. And so adab was a very prominent theme in the discourse of the early righteous Muslims, and they discoursed on it profusely. They had an idea of having a sense of adab with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, having a sense of adab with the Prophet alayhi salam, having a sense of adab with believers, having a sense of adab with oneself, with one's animals, with one's items that one owns, etc., etc. Adab was an all-encompassing concept that really guided and defined the life of the believer. And people were at different levels when it came to the adab that they displayed in their daily actions. And the highest level, as Imam al-Qushayri mentions, quoting Abu Hatim al-Sijistani from Abu Nasr al-Sarraj, a famous Sufi sheikh, who said that people are on three levels when it comes to adab. There's the Ahl dunya, the people of the world, and for them adab is about rhetoric and being good in speech and memorizing the ulum and so on and so forth. Basically, being someone who's literate. But for the people of religion, for them adab is to protect their limbs from avoiding sin, to leave their shahawat or their desires, to really exert themselves in trying to purify their nufus from bad character traits. And then there's the highest level of adab, right, which as-Sarraj says is for the ahl al-Khususiyya. It's for a very specific group of people. And the adab related to them is purification of the heart, to preserve their moment, to not fall prey to these khawatir, these thoughts that occur to our minds that we've been talking about so often, to be in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as is deserving of that moment, and so on and so forth. And so in the prayer has a particular adab. And when we recite the Quran, when we come across specific words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, specific messages, then there is a particular adab associated with how we are to respond to those messages. The baseline of adab is to recite the verses properly, to recite them in a way where one understands them, and then to respond to those verses in terms of the meaning that they are trying to convey. If it is about promise, then hope. If it is about a threat of punishment, then with fear. If it is about commanding something or prohibiting something, then resolving to fulfill those commands, and so on and so forth. These are the adab that attach themselves to our recitation of the Quran outside of prayer and especially within the prayer itself. Another closely related concept is the concept of ihsan. And so the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَتَبَ الْإِحْسَانَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prescribed ihsan or excellence in everything. And so just like excellence relates to how you slaughter an animal, as the Prophet said, right? That إِذَا ذَبَحْتُمْ فَأَحْسِنُوا الذَّبَحْ, right? That if you slaughter an animal, then make your slaughtering excellent by sharpening your blade, right? By sharpening your blade. And so similarly, there's an ihsani element associated with the prayer. And ihsan in prayer again means that you stand with khushu'. You stand with a sense of humility to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know who you are in front of, you know what you are saying, you understand the conversation that is being had between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know what you are asking of Him, what you are saying to Him, what you are expressing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You understand what He is saying to you, because as we've mentioned in the past, the relationship that we have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not a one-sided relationship. There's a sense of mutuality that exists, where when we remember Him, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala remembers us, as He says in the Quran. And so when we read the Quran, this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaking to us and trying to guide us and teach us and making us reflect on specific meanings. And so ihsan in salah is to be cognizant of what the Quran says and to reflect on its message. And then thirdly, we have this notion of being in your moment. And this is again something we took when it came to adab, this idea of every individual is in a particular moment. Your moment is the present situation that you are in, that you are occupied in. It is not your future, it is not your past. It is what you are in right now. And when Amr ibn Uthman al-Makki was asked about tasawwuf, defined tasawwuf for us, then he defined tasawwuf as that a slave, right, أن يكون العبد في كل وقت بما هو أولى به في الوقت. That tasawwuf is for a slave to be occupied in his moment with that which is most optimal or superior for him to be engaged in that moment. And so when you are in your salah, your primary concern, what your moment demands of you, is to be concentrated in the prayer. And you cannot have that concentration or khushu' without reflecting on what you are saying in the prayer. And those who lack adab in their moment, the people of tasawwuf, what they say is they eventually get sort of pushed out the door. They get banished. If you lack adab, some of the Sufis said, if you lack adab in the living room, you get banished to the door. And if you lack adab at the door, then you get banished from the house. And so similarly, a lot of the Sufis warned that when people show bad adab to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and part of showing bad adab and part of missing your moment and being neglectful and heedless of the moment you are in, is to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in prayer and not recognize who you're standing in front of and what you are saying to Him. And when you do that, then a lot of Sufis warned that this is actually, as Imam al-Khadimi also mentioned earlier, this can actually be a reason for your banishment from the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's a very dangerous thing. And so we need to take our salah seriously in that regard. And so these are three concepts in our tradition that are quite meaningful over here. The idea of adab and ihsan and your waqt, or the moment that you are in. And prayer demands specific action from you, a specific state of being, a specific state of mind, a specific state of reflection and recognition about whom you are in front of. And it is only through that you can attain that khushu' that we all hope for. And so inshallah, with that we will end this session. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.